So you got good audio and a good video over the screen.
Yes, sir, we do.
All right, well, here we go. About 30 minutes late. Well, somewhere in that melee's just then, I think Katie introduced me, but
She did.
anyway, yeah. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to address your group tonight, and I'm going to walk you through some of the basic elements of archaeology just to begin with, in case you're not familiar with archaeology or what all that entails. And then we're going to get into some actual local geology, or sorry, local archaeology rather. And let me start out here with some of the basics and what is archaeology. It's a study of past cultures based upon what they left behind. In our country out here, there's a lot of flint artifacts that ancient peoples left behind, tools and weapon points, etc. Studying those is archaeology, but there's all other kinds of archaeology that you see there on your screen. And then archaeology is just one of the 4 subdisciplines of anthropology. Now, in the United States, to my knowledge, if you want to be an archaeologist, you're going to have to get a degree in anthropology, which is going to also include cultural anthropology. That's literally studying modern cultures, physical and biological anthropology, which is studying the human body, human skeletons in archaeological sites, etc. And then linguistics, the study of languages, the evolution of languages, etc. And those all comprise archaeology. There are some places like Canada or the United Kingdom where you can actually get a degree in archaeology, but in the United States, usually it's through anthropology. This is a shot of our state with the Edwards Plateau, and that's the part of the state that we're going to talk about. Really, Texas has some of the very best archaeology in North America. And there are just sites all over the state, and particularly in our part of Texas. It's considered one of the best archaeological regions in the state. Before we go any further, we need to get acquainted with archaeological time. This is a generalized chart of archaeological periods in the state of Texas, starting with present day 0 in our historic period for the last just 200 to 300 years, and working its way back all the way to possibly even 20,000 years ago when the first Native Americans were in Texas. You can also see there when the large fauna of the Ice Age period became extinct. It wasn't a single event, it was multiple events over thousands of years. But by 9,000, even 10,000 years ago, all of those critters had become extinct. You can see those arrows at the bottom. I hope that as you move to the left, you're going back towards the Pleistocene and the Ice Age. It gets colder and wetter. And as you move forward towards the present day, climates tended to be warming and drying, not in a straight line, but certainly a general overall trend of warming and drying. These are some of those ancient large animals that walked around here in the Kerr County area. Everybody's heard of them, I think, but these were here up until 10, 11,000 years ago. And a 6-foot man there for scale size. We still coming through loud and clear, just to check? Hello?
Yes.
We still coming through?
Yes, we can
Good.
hear you
Well,
fine.
you know, with what happened a while ago, I'm just not taking anything for granted.
I hear you.
Let's talk about general site types out here. The first one are what are called procurement areas. These ancient peoples had a Stone Age culture. Stone was the steel of their time. It was what they made weapons out of. It's what they used for tools, etc. And This flint or chert, same thing, came out of the outcrops of the Edwards limestone, which is very prevalent out here. And these ancient peoples went to those outcrops, or they went to rivers and streams where the outcrops had eroded into and left cobbles of chert and flint. And that's where they began the process of making their tools and weapons. This is just a block diagram of our general area here, showing Guadalupe River, the Edwards limestone, chert deposits within it. And so where you can see some of those outcrops, like they literally could have walked up to those and picked up these chert nodules that were eroding out of the host limestone. The stream gravels and so forth, that the cherts in those gravels had eroded out of outcrops far upstream, maybe 10, 15 miles, and been washed downriver. But either way, they were places where the process of tool making could begin. The second general type of sites are rock shelters and cave. We don't, caves. We don't have many of those here in the Kerr County area, but we do have some. And where these are very prevalent is down in the Pecos and Devil's River and Rio Grande River areas. And the upper two are in that area. The one on the right, actually, you can see the rock art in it. And there are literally hundreds of these rock shelters, mostly on private land, that have rock art. This is arguably the very best place in North America for rock art, rock shelter and cave exhibits. The one on the bottom is just over in neighboring Real County, where our organization worked about 8 to 9 years ago. There were artifacts in the cave, artifacts outside of the cave. Obviously, it had been used for human habitation over the millennia. The third type of site is the one that is probably the most prevalent and the most interesting also. It's where the people literally lived. These were semi-nomadic people. They didn't stay in one place all the time. They moved around and exploited the native plants and the native game. And they left a lot of artifacts behind when they left, one of which are burned rock middens, which we'll talk about a little more. This is the very far left map shows you not a topographic map, but a contour map showing the density of these middens. What middens are, probably some of you, maybe all of you know what they are. They are the remains of the cooking events in these earth ovens, like is shown on the upper right of this frame. And what the Native Americans would do is to dig a pit, and they would put fire in it, some sort of wood, and then they would put these native limestone rocks on top of it. And the rocks would begin to heat up. Then they would put native plants that were otherwise not edible onto these hot rocks. And then they would literally cover up the oven and let it perform kind of like a Dutch oven. For about 24 to 48 hours, it would cook those native plants or even meats. And it would cook out the toxins. And then they could open up the earth oven and eat the native plants, and it would be user-friendly to the human digestive system. Once they had done this 2 or 3 times with the same rocks, the rocks would crack up, obviously, after the heating episode. So they'd scrape them out of the way, pardon me, and they would start all over again with much larger rocks. Like you see these 2 ladies there in the top with a couple of white objects. Those are rocks, limestone rocks that they're going to put in the next heating episode. And you can imagine doing this over dozens and dozens, hundreds, thousands of times over millennia in the same place, and you get buildups like you see there in that frame in the lower left. And those are called middens. Now, what you get at these sites are not only the middens, but you get all kinds of leftovers from ancient lifeways. You had tool making going on there. So you're going to find flint flakes. You're going to find flint tools. You're going to find projectile points. There's residue from some of the things they cooked. There's animal bone, just a host of things that would be left over after these groups, usually small groups, not like you see in the movies, 10, 15, 20, maybe 30 people at the very most. And then the other kind of sites, very, very few of them are here in our area. But you see those killed and butcher sites, buffalo jump sites, and so forth. Lithic scatters, rather, are really quite common. They're just where they made the tools, so that the flint flakes that came off of the tool making left a scatter of lithic material. Now, we do have a very famous burial and cemetery site here in Kerr County. It's called can't think of the name right now, but it's in northern Kerr County, and burying cemetery. And it's been evaluated by University of Texas back in the 70s. They found the remains of 63 individuals in it, and that wasn't all that was in it. I mean, there was much more, but they just wanted to test a part of the rock, the sinkhole, and they age dated the remains, and it was a span of time between 7,000 and 2,000 years ago that Native Americans had actually been interred into that sinkhole cemetery. Now, I talked about lithic reduction. This is what this slide represents. So that far piece of chert or flint on the left is what you'd find at the outcrop, or what you'd find down in the river gravels. They would start with that, and they would have another large rock, usually another piece of flint, and they would begin to strike it and knock off pieces of it. And as the original cobble got smaller with the pieces being knocked off of it, they would change tools to something like the base of deer antlers, which was a little softer, not as hard as a big chert hammerstone, for instance. And they would continue to work that down until it was either something like a knife or an actual projectile point. And they would also use the tips of the antlers, of deer antlers, to do some of this late stage flaking, the real finesse flaking. This is just called simply lithic reduction. And as you see there at the top of this slide, that latter stage was usually done around the real occupation sites, whereas the other stages there to the left were done at the procurement sites. Now, this is just an example of one particular type of spear point. Actually, it's a dart point, and you'll see why I call it a dart point in just a moment. This is called a peternalis point. And these were just hafted onto shafts. And then those shafts were part of a device called an atlatl, which this represents. This is what they used before the bow and arrow technology got to this part of the state. So from the time the first humans got here, sometime possibly as early as 20,000 years ago, this is what they were using right up until bow and arrow technology came in. There was obviously a phase out of atlatls and a phase in of bow and arrow. These are not to the same scale, but what makes this a unique device is that middle piece there. That's the stick, actually the throwing stick, which fits onto the hook of it, fit onto the nock of what looks like a large arrow. And then you can see the Native American there throwing it, and as he throws it, it comes off of that wooden stick, and there's leverage created. So the shaft flies at a greater velocity than it would as if you just thrown it with your naked arm. Probably 2 times at least the velocity. And that's what they used to hunt until the bow and arrow came along. These are some examples of real arrow points on the left and real dart points. That is the points that went on the atlatl shaft. Those are dart points. You can see the difference in size. Most people, myself included, growing up, I call those things on the right arrowheads, but they're not. They were what were used with the atlatl. And they're so much larger than a typical arrow point that if you fashion these onto a regular bow and arrow shaft, they wouldn't have flown very far because they were so big and heavy. Now we're going to go through a series of different types of stone tools other than the projectile points, and I'll just start with the scraping and cutting tools. This is some examples. These are all, by the way, authentic from sites here in Kerr County. Scrapers were very common. They just picked up the chert and flaked it to create a sharp edge on it. These things came in all shapes and sizes, but you can just imagine what they would use them for. Hide scraping, scraping different plants, some sort of food processing, whether it be butchering of animals or processing of plants. Same is true with the knife. This is a broken knife blade. It could have been hafted onto a wooden stick. Then it could have been just used like it is, obviously before it was broken. The gravers there at the bottom are exactly what they mean. They are pointed pieces of chert which they use to do engravings, perhaps engravings on bone or antler, or just scraping of different parts of the hide, or so even scraping some meat off of the hard to get to parts of the hide or the skeleton. You can always tell these because it's not just the shape and the look of them, but if you take a small hand lens and look at the tip, if it's a true graver, it's going to have what's called use wear. There are going to be little tiny flakes off that end where it has been used, where it's been in contact with, for instance, a deer antler or bone or something like that. These are perforators and drills. A lot of times these were also hafted onto wooden sticks and utilized, but they were used for punching, perforating hides, a variety of different things. These are fairly common, as are the gravers. The upper left here is a food processing device called a mono and a metate. The mono part is the smaller part. It's handheld, and the metate is the larger part there. Both of these are, by the way, native limestone, and there's a depression there in that larger part, and that's where they would grind such things as berries and nuts and so forth. Usually the metate portion of this device is actually in the bedrock. It's not a portable piece like you see here. And these things are all over too, because plant processing was a big part of their lifeways. The upper right object is called a hammerstone, and it's not a very good picture of this one, but you can tell a hammerstone, it's either going to be chert or limestone, usually chert. And it was one of those devices used in the lithic reduction. In the very early stages, they're using this to hammer against the native chert cobbles to begin the flaking process. And you can always see these impact featured all along the face of these. The chopper varieties like A to Z out here really, but it's literally a hand axe, and they would flake it down to a certain point, and then they would use it for all kinds of things, chopping wood and so forth. Not very good on the wrist. All right, now that just kind of gives you a real quick look at what was sort of the basics of their life ways. And what we're going to now look at is seeing some of these things at a real site here in Kerr County. And this is it's not only a diverse site, but it's also a Paleo-Indian site. So if you can remember that time chart at the very beginning, there was to the far left, when you get back there past 9,000 years and older, that's Paleo-Indian period. So we're talking about some really old archaeological remains here. Like all the sites that the Hill Country Archaeology Association investigates. Now, in our initial part of this thing when I was getting cut in and cut out, I could hear Francois describing some of the things that the Hill Country Archaeology Association does. And we regularly get inquiries from landowners that want us to come out and look at their property to tell them what kind of if they have an archaeological site, and if so, what kind of a site is it? And this is just one of those instances where the landowner actually saw our website and contacted us. And we went out and we began talking to the landowner. What's key in these kind of things is having trust between the landowners and ourselves. We're going to protect the privacy of the landowner and respect his or her wishes in what we do out there. But our main goal, our real mission statement, is to help landowners understand what they've got on their property, educate them about the archaeology of the area, and then general education of the public, whether it be lectures or teaching classes, etc. The site that we're talking about here initially appeared to be just another midden site. You know, there are literally thousands of those kind of sites out here. But as we began to get into it, we realized it was different. Now, we don't like to excavate sites without a really good reason, because once you excavate, you have destroyed it. It's not like you cut a tree down and a sapling can grow next to it. Once you've excavated a site, it's gone forever, unless you do it properly, unless you excavate it professionally and you record everything very carefully so that you can literally reconstruct the site by paper or by digital, either one. And in this case, the landowner really wanted to know everything there was to know about his site. And he wanted us to excavate. So with that in mind, we thought that was a good enough reason to do that. He actually has an idea of starting a small museum on his ranch so the friends, family, neighbors, et cetera, can come and see. And we thought that was a real good idea. The site has a lot of uniqueness to it. It's got trade items, things that are apparently not from this area. And we know enough about the rest of North American archaeology, we can figure out where some of this stuff came from. And you can see a few of those listed. There are also some really uncommon tools like a base tang or shaft straighteners. You just don't find those very often. And then the projectiles, and I'll include the arrow points and the dart points in the projectiles. We know their morphology changes through time, different forms or within different temporal periods. And so we can tell just by looking at those points that we had something that was going to date from Middle Paleo-Indian about 10,000, 11,000 years ago, right up to about 250 years ago, before really the first Anglo settlement occurred in this area while there were still Native Americans in the area. What we have done to date in the site is we have carefully surveyed and then excavated by trowel 37 square meters of surface area, not all in one place, but scattered over the site, and an estimated 22 cubic meters of archaeological deposits have been troweled, carefully looked at, and then put through 1/4-inch mesh screens just to make sure we didn't miss the small stuff. Well, you convert meters, which we always work in, into into yards, and it's about 28 cubic yards, which a 15 cubic yard dump truck, that would be 2 dump trucks load full of archaeological deposits that we have gone through very carefully over the last 2 years. And there's a few people in our audience that are with us out there, and they know just how tedious and methodical this can be. But if you don't go slow, you will miss something, and missing something could make a difference in the interpretation of the site. This is a picture along the stream. The site is on the right. It's a beautiful setting. If you've got to stay in an excavation very long, this is a really good place to do it because the scenery is great and there's lots of material to look at. And it even in the summer months, it stays relatively cool because you're down by the stream and you've got a lot of shade trees. This is a map of the site. You can see the scale there in meters in the legend. And this is, first of all, it's a topographic map. That's what all the small lines are. And then there are the different pieces of the site, such as these thick oblong things and circles. Those are the middens. There are 2 middens on this site. And then you can see the small square and rectangular boxes. Those are the units that we have excavated. Now, what I'm going to show you now is what's called a geological cross-section. So from this line A to B, if you were to be able to cut through the site with a giant knife somehow and then peel it away like you would a layer cake, this is what it would look like. So on the left are the cliffs. Let me back up to that. So that's the bottom part of your slide there where you see all the tight contour lines together. And then as you move to the right, you get into the site and you can see there's some separation between layers. We can determine that there's been at least 3 separate significant deposits from this stream that has carried in sediments from upstream and deposited it here. These are called terraces, stream terraces or river terraces. And you can see with the print inside of them that they're different. The T2 deposits, for instance, on the bottom are the oldest. The T1 deposits are next youngest. And then finally that far right deposit there next to the stream, that's relatively modern, the last few hundred years at least. This is a shot of some of the earlier excavations. And we're not in the Paleo-Indian area yet. We haven't even discovered Paleo-Indian there yet. We're in what's called the Archaic area. So it's much younger in the 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 year old period. But you can see the rocks there in those units. Those are some of the heating elements of past hearth or oven events for cooking either plant or animals. In this particular area, we also, in addition to the arrow points and dart points, we began to encounter quite a bit of bone for this part of the state. And some of it was bison, modern bison, but that modern bison has existed for the last 5,000 years. So what layers we're in at this point, or stratigraphy, is about 2,000 years old. Now, some of the other things that were interesting, very unusual, that we were finding amongst all of the other animal remains was, first of all, on the left, there's a canine tooth and then a lower molar from lower jaw of a canid. That is the family of dogs and coyotes and wolves. You pretty much have to have a complete skull to really tell which of those it is, but they had domestic dogs at that time. Domestic dogs might have journeyed over, likely did journey over back before 20,000 years ago when ancient peoples migrated from Northeast Asia into North and South America. The bones in the center, we feel are pretty strongly are turkey, obviously wild turkey bones. We do have skeletons of different animals, so we can do comparative anatomy. And these are very thin wall bones, which is characteristic of bird bones. They have no marrow inside. And even the fragments that we have there have the morphology of the part of the wing bones of wild turkeys. And like I said, we were getting bison bones, deer, and antelope. There were even antelope in this area as recently as 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 years ago. These are some of the trade items. In other words, they're not native to this area, so they had to have been brought in. And we know that these ancient peoples had pretty extensive trade networks. Pottery down there on the right are just a few pottery shards from the Caddo style of pottery, which is very typical in East Texas. The upper left objects are quartz crystals, relatively clear quartz crystals. You don't get that here. You don't even get that over in the central mineral region, except the very eastern portion of the central mineral region or the Ouachita area of Arkansas. That's the very closest that you can get this kind of crystal. Now, I'm a retired geologist, and I've got another friend who's specialized. He's a retired geologist also at another archaeological society in Texas, and he was a mineralogist, so he was a specialist in minerals and knowing where different rocks and minerals came from. So he helped us out with this, and that's the two areas that this could only have come from. But the prize of the whole trade item list are these two small flakes here. These are cultural flakes. They were obviously knapped or chipped from a larger piece of obsidian. And the nice thing about obsidian is you can actually have it typed and they can figure out what outcrop it came from. So we sent these flakes off to a special lab, and they were able to, with their vast database, they were able to determine that this obsidian came from Idaho. Now, what's not known and what never will be known is how long it took Native Americans to get that here. It was probably over a period of tens to maybe hundreds of years, multiple trade swaps along a path that roughly was as far out as Idaho. And there's actually a fair amount of obsidian in Texas that comes from these Malad, Idaho outcrops. Now back to, you've seen some of this before, but this is all from this site, and the arrow points are from the site, and all the rest of these are dark points. If you look down at the small text below each one of them, it gives the period. So the ones that are the oldest on this page are the ones in the bottom right. Those particular points are 6,000, 6,500 years old, and you get progressively younger as you move to the left, and then upper right, and then back to the left. And finally, the arrow points are the very youngest. These particular arrow points are anywhere from 400 to 900 years before present. This is a summary of all of the projectile points there. And it's not really, with the exception of the bottom ones there we're going to talk about now, there's not really anything unique about these other points. These are typical types of projectile points found in this part of Texas. But it's the ones at the bottom that are the real the real highlight of the site, and that's what we're going to talk about now. So there's one thing about archaeology: there can be direct, disciplined methodology, and there can be accidents. And this was a complete accident, where the landowner, since we would go out there every Monday, one Monday we were out there and we saw the landowner had used a ditch witch to dig a ditch for a water line. And one of our people went over to the ditch while we were working in that Archaic area, and he found something. And he walked over to the rest of us and he said, "I think I got something really interesting here." And where he found it was right there where that arrow is shown, and that's in the soil that came out of the ditch. And where that is right, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but it's down at the bottom of where that dashed line is, where it says first SMH found. Well, that's where that point was found. And we knew something, not only was it unique, but also the soil color was unique. Now this site has got trees all over it, so the ground cover, there's a lot of leaves and grass on it, so you couldn't really see what the ground color was. This was distinctly different, so we knew we were in some different type of sediments, likely a different age. The SMH, or the St. Mary's Hall Point, is a very unique point for Texas. It does not have a wide range. It was first discovered back in the 70s, but they didn't know what it was. So they didn't even name it St. Mary's Hall at the time. They called it Plainview, which is another style of point. It wasn't until later that a couple of archaeologists were able to find it at another site, and they realized it's not St. Mary, sorry, it's not Plainview. It's something very different. And they gave it a new name, and they used the original site, the St. Mary's Hall site, as the basis for the point name, and it's called the St. Mary's Hall Point. Now you can see there's examples of this point here at the bottom, and you notice the flaking across the face. The flakes go all the way across the face, and they're oblique. And that's very unique about this point. Now it's got some other neat characteristics about it. It's very thin. The time period that it existed within was generally about 10,500 to 10,000. There's only a couple of sites known in the state that have radiocarbon dates that can give direct age dating and establish how old these points were. And one of those sites is this one, because we've had material radiocarbon dated in association with the St. Mary's Halls we found there. And we had a date of 10,248 to 10,193. So we've kind of defined the bottom, the youngest part, and another site down around San Antonio has defined the oldest point, about 10,500. And this is, we are very well associated with a number of professional archaeologists. One of them is Dr. Thomas Hester, who is kind of the guru of St. Mary's Hall points. He's written on them, published on them more than probably any other archaeologist in the state. And he knows exactly what we're doing out there at the site because we keep him up to date with it. And he's very fascinated that we've got such a good radiocarbon date, which he considers to be only one of two in the state so far. The point that was found at the beginning in the ditch is the one in the upper left. You can really see that oblique flaking across it. And the others are just examples of that, and or of other points that we found out there. Yeah. Did I lose you guys? Hello?
I can see you and hear you.
Yes, we're still
Yeah,
here.
I'm, for some reason, the slides are not advancing. Maybe there we can get it. Okay. So these are just some other examples of the ones we found. Probably the best one we found is that one right in the center. It's the largest one, just about 6 centimeters long. And it's got the flaking style on one side of it is different than the flaking style on the other. And this Dr. Thomas Hester said he's never seen one like this. Of the hundreds of points he's seen, he said this is the only one he knows that's got a different style on each face. And they this one in the very top is a recent find. You can see it's quite a bit wider than these others, but this form does get that wide. It's not common, but that was 2 weeks ago, I think, when we found that one. Now, I don't know if Trudy is connected to us, but that's Trudy Eberhard. They're in one of the paleo units, and those are tree roots. We don't like to cut tree roots down because that kills trees. So we left the roots there. But this is just one of the typical units we were working on back in October of last year. And in that unit, in this part of the unit, there's a caliche profile that develops in the bottom of it. And I don't have good photographs of this, but what I will show in the next one is this rock here. That's a pretty large rock. You never know what you're going to find under the rocks. And this one was by itself and it was large. So we pedestaled around it. And then at a point we decided to lift the rock and see what was under it. And that's what was under it. And that is another St. Mary's Hall. It was in direct contact with the rock. So the flint and the limestone rock were touching each other. And it was most likely cached there. Now, the date that we got, the radiocarbon date, was from these bone pieces, which were found in that same unit that Trudy was in, but sometime before that picture was taken of Trudy. And we sent we sent all 3 bone specimens off to a radiocarbon lab, and they were able to get a good date from one of the pieces of the bone, which gives you that date there. Now, what that means, a 10,248 to 10,193 cal BP and 2 sigma. 2 sigma is as good as you can get. It's a 95% confidence level that your date is right. But they can't give you a specific date because there's a margin of error, which is what the 248, 193 difference is. The cal means it has been the radiocarbon years that the lab derives first have to be converted into calendar years because the 2 do not match each other. And so this is a calendar year before present, or calibrated years, calibrated calendar, one and the same in this dating context. The point there to the left was in association with the bone. And actually, after we did this dating with this point, we found other points that also were in other St. Mary's points, that is, that were in close association with the bone. So you cannot date the flint itself, but you can date organic material that's in association with it. Further down in that unit was this, a beautiful drill. And it was literally lying on top of 2 bone fragments, which because of the thickness of the bone wall, they were not buffalo. They're too small to be buffalo, but they're larger than a small mammal. Most likely they were deer or antelope. This is another dating possibility we've got here, although this is not necessarily a St. Mary's Hall point, but it is a drill. And there's some speculation that it was a St. Mary's Hall point at first. The base of it there's got a concavity like a St. Mary's, and for some reason they resharpened it, but we really don't know that with this particular drill. Another set of units just about 8 meters away from the ones we were just talking about revealed a cooking hearth, actually a series of cooking hearths. And those are limestone pieces that were used in the cooking process. And depending on what level you were in, that picture would look different, because this whole group of hearths covers a vertical distance of about a meter, almost a meter. And we did find some charcoal under some of these. We tried to have those dated, but they did not. They were too degraded to date. But we were able to get a identification of the type of material that the charcoal was from Dr. Leslie Bush, who was a paleobotanist. And she couldn't get any further than it being just in the oak family. So that was the wood that was used to heat this cooking hearth. This is just another level of that same hearth, but deeper. And then another point form that's out there, which is actually younger than the St. Mary's, is this Angostura form. And the complete points out of the Dr. Hester's Stone Artifacts of Texas Indians Lithics book shows complete points. The ones we found, you can see there's a front view and a rear view. So B and B prime, for instance, are the same point, just different sides of the point. But what we're looking at is the bottom half of those points. So there are 4 of those, and they have a younger distribution somewhere in the 8,000 to 9,000 years before present range. Okay. This is a summary out of actually Dr. Hester's 2017 publication on St. Mary's Hall sites in the state. And you can see by this slide, which I checked again yesterday, we had 21, and that put us in 5th place. And we found the 22nd one today. It was a St. Mary's that had been broken and resharpened into a drill, but it was still a St. Mary's Hall. So that makes 22 St. Mary's Hall points from this site in a relatively small area, really a relatively small area. Okay, that's the archaeology part of the presentation. I do want to mention one thing before I leave. If you're not aware of this, beginning in June 12th through the 19th, the Texas Archaeology Society is going to have its annual field school in Kerrville. This is a field school. It's held once a year in different parts of the state that has quality archaeology, where literally hundreds of Texas Archaeology Society members can participate in a week-long archaeological event of excavations, lab analysis, surveys, etc. This one will be mainly prehistoric, but there will be some historic sites that will be evaluated and excavated in Kerr County. Most of the participants, we anticipate 400 plus people, maybe 500. Most of those people, like myself and Francois and Trudy, and I think I saw Larry Eskridge's name there somewhere, and Sandra Haldeman, I believe, might have been in the audience at once. They, who also belong to our association. We're avocational archaeologists. We weren't professionals, but we love it. We study it. We do it. And hopefully, you know, as in our case of our organization, you have the proper ethics and the proper mission statements to educate the public and respect people's property and do site work for the sake of the property owner. But the field school will have a number of professional archaeologists, one in particular who will be over the entire archaeological excavations and surveys, and then a number of other professionals that largely will be coming from Austin. If you are interested in it, you can join the TAS for, I think it's $70 a year now for an individual membership. You'll get an annual bulletin from them, and you can go to that website right there and find out all you want to about the society and the field school. It's literally going to be open to registration all through the month of May, really into the early part of June. And it's going to be a very exciting event because the main site will be excavating. The Hill Country Archaeology Association has worked for the last 5 years, and we know that it is an extremely rich and an extremely large archaeological site. So I think that's all I have there. I appreciate your patience.
Okay, Steve. We do have a few questions for you. The first one comes from
Okay.
Hope, and she asks, what was the name of the cemetery site in North Kerr County?
the Bering sinkhole. And
Bering?
it's on a private ranch. Yeah, Bering, Bering. It's on a private ranch. And if you got time for just a quick one, it was accidentally discovered by the rancher that owned the land, who was doing some backhoe work along one of his back fences where cedar had overgrown things. And he was clearing out the cedar and he thought he saw some bones on the surface of the ground. And he took the backhoe scoop and began to move the cedar out of the way and began to see more bones, and realized, being, you know, a good honest rancher, that they weren't deer bones. And he contacted the University of Texas Paleontology Lab, Vertebrate Paleontology Lab. And then they got the archaeologists involved, and they were able to then come out and determine that it was a sinkhole. It had filled in largely, but there was 2 or 3 feet of sinkhole there that you could actually see, and that's what he put his backhoe scoop down into. But once the teams got there and began excavations, they actually excavated down 25 feet to the base of the sinkhole. And they didn't excavate but just a very small part of the overall sinkhole lateral. That's a very, very important site that most people don't even know about. And it is on private land. And that's the way we want to keep it, confidential.
Okay. All righty. We have a question from Nancy, and she's curious. She asks, why were the St. Mary's Hall points named after St. Mary's Hall? And she wonders if that was her high school where she graduated.
St. Mary's Hall Academy in San Antonio, North San Antonio. If that's where she graduated, then that's what it was named after.
Aha. So there you go, Nancy.
The reason that, these different point styles generally have geographic names. So when they are first discovered by professional archaeologists, and then they are described in archaeological publications, then the discovering and describing archaeologist gets to name them. And almost all the time, it's a geographic name. And in this case, it was St. Mary's Hall Academy.
All right, thank you. Billy and Patty Ewan are asking, why are there more sites in Kerr County as opposed to Gillespie County?
Well, all we can say at this point, as far as recorded sites, that is the sites that have been officially recorded with the state, that Kerr County has more than Gillespie County. I can't remember exactly how many Gillespie County has, but Kerr County has close to 760 now. But I can guarantee you there are literally thousands of sites out there on private land that nobody knows about except the private landowners. And, you know, a lot of the ranchers just don't want their sites tampered with. They don't trust the state. You know, we get all kind of different reasons from them, but it's their land, it's their property, it's their site, it's their artifact. So we just try to tell them what they've got, and if they want to have it recorded with the state, it's their option. The beauty of it being recorded with the state, and this is at Austin at the Texas Archaeology Research Laboratories where these things are recorded, is that it goes into a big database. And that database is completely confidential. It can only be used by authorized professional archaeologists or certain avocational archaeologists that have been cleared by the state. So from a confidentiality standpoint, it's very safe. But, you know, if a rancher doesn't believe that, they don't believe it. So that's their option. But what the beauty of that database is, if you put your site into it, then it is something that is most likely going to get utilized down the road in some big study that an archaeologist does of the region, which includes that site. And that site is contributing information to that regional understanding. That's the beauty of having it recorded in a common database.
All right. Well, that appears to be the last of the questions, Steve, and I want to thank you on behalf of the chapter for coming and giving this presentation. And I want to thank all of those who are attending for being so patient while we sorted out our technical difficulties. And Steve, come back. Enjoyed it.
We'll find more and come back.
Okay, sounds like a plan. All right.